Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the breakthrough which has allowed the DUP to finally announce in the early hours of the morning that it will agree to reform the Stormont Executive pending legislation being introduced by the Westminster government. But what is the deal and who exactly is being conned? Because someone is absolutely being conned here. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the DUP have announced that they have come to agreement with the Conservative government about forming the Stormont Executive, which would mean that Northern Ireland gets its devolved government back, the Assembly can get back to work, and it has a lot of work waiting for it. And it also means for the first time historically, there will be a nationalist First Minister. Now, some people felt the DUP would never agree because this would stick in their craw too much. But even the DUP have to accept political reality sometimes. Indeed, it could be argued that they have wanted to adopt some level of pragmatism for some time, but were held hostage by a minority within their ranks who thought they could get everything with their extended strike. A strike which, unlike the ones which happened last week for ordinary people, meant that the DUP MLAs were still able to draw their full salaries for doing no work. But never mind all that for now. The question is, what is this agreement? What is the agreement which unlocked this minor miracle? Well, in a sense, we don't know. The details are to be published tomorrow because the government has to enact legislation as part of this deal. Reports suggest that the legislation will be passed this week and that Stormont could be convening this weekend, possibly as early as Friday. The deal is believed to be along the lines of implementing rules in line with obligations related to the access to the single market. Basically, the DUP and some other unionists outside the party don't want Westminster adopting rules just because it makes things easier for the EU regarding keeping Northern Ireland in step with the single market. But this is the only way the Good Friday Agreement can work. The entire island of Ireland has to behave as if it's all one market, even though it's not quite true anymore. Sam Coates of Sky put it quite well when he said that what the Conservative government is trying to do here is simultaneously tell three groups of people mutually exclusive things. First, they want the DUP to believe that Westminster are unilaterally changing some aspects of the Windsor Framework agreed with the EU last year. Second, they want the EU to believe that they're not making any unilateral changes to their Windsor Framework agreement at all. And third, they're trying to tell Brexiteers that none of this reflects a barrier to taking full advantage of Brexit freedoms, like the freedom to carry on shooting ourselves in the foot, for example. As Coates put it, not all of these things can be true and the government know it. So although we won't know exactly what the deal is until tomorrow, we do know that it's a con. The question is, who is being conned and will it work? So let's take each of Coates's points in turn. First, the DUP. Are they being conned? Well, have they been offered a deal and legislation which makes it sound like there's more UK side unilateral decision making than there really is? Because the way I look at it is the DUP quite clearly don't like the reality of the Brexit which they campaigned for. They hate the Irish Sea border and would at this point support, I think, almost anything which sees it disappear. However, for now, here they are. But my impression, it's only a perception, is that much of the DUP recognises that they're not going to persuade Westminster, no matter who's in government, to simply get rid of the trade border in the Irish Sea. That is now crystal clear to them. They seem to recognise that they're going to have to come up with some practical solutions now. The reason we've had this recent purist mentality coming out is because most of the DUP were, for the sake of pretending to be united, having to defer to their lowest common denominator, otherwise known as Sammy Wilson and Ian Paisley Jr., I suspect. As such, I think that because the DUP recognise that they backed themselves into a corner, that they might accept what really just amounts to a face-saving way out. So I think there's every chance that the deal does nothing to change anything in practical terms, but rather introduces an emergency lever which could, in theory, deviate from the Windsor Framework, but is not intended to be used. Indeed, there was a lot of talk of this sort of arrangement with the Windsor Framework deal last year. Because if the deal genuinely changes the Windsor Framework, like in a real practical sense, it affects the practical operation of the Windsor Framework, then Sunak is back to square one with the Northern Ireland Protocol problems. Which brings me to the second group, the EU. Now, it's possible that Sunak could be hoodwinking the DUP either explicitly or with their full knowledge, but there will be no fooling the EU on this. They will know what is the practical upshot of any deal. If the deal causes a material risk to the single market, which the Windsor Framework limited, then we're back to the position whereby a trade war is back on the table. And think to yourself, which would be worse for Sunak in election year? Stormont continuing to attract flies, which it is literally doing, by the way, or a trade war with our closest and most important market? If Sunak goes long for an autumn election, he's going to have enough trouble with standards controls impacting trade without a full-blown trade war. Without knowing the details of the deal, I'm going to bet that whatever legislation is being passed this week does not change the operation of the Windsor Framework in a practical sense. I'm going to guess that what we've got here is essentially an illusion. And I'd further guess that Sunak has cleared all of this with the EU Commission behind closed doors. I strongly suspect what we're going to see tomorrow is legislation which, in theory, could pull the brakes on adopting rules to keep the EU happy, but brakes where you have to smash protective glass to get at the lever. In other words, a hypothetical device which will never be used, because if it is used, then the EU will go, you've broken our agreement, we're going to take action. A way of the government, every time it adopts a rule needed to make the Windsor Framework operate, being able to say, yes, the EU wants us to do this, absolutely true, but that's not why we're doing it, because we've got this lever, you see, we could just stop it. No, we're doing it because we want to do it as well. It's our decision, which effectively takes the form of conning the DUP, but maybe, as I say, a con that they're all in on and go along with for public appearances. Because let's be clear, the DUP boycott did not work. It failed hard because their demands were simply not feasible. But they couldn't just go quietly back because they'd look utterly ridiculous. So they need to be able to claim that they've won a major concession, that it was worth the boycott, it achieved them something, they've got this thing. I hold in my hand a piece of paper. I bet they haven't, though. But then there's this third group, the Brexit supporters. Now, we're particularly thinking here within the Tory ranks in Westminster, right? No one else really causes Sunak major problems. So these are people who don't like the idea of tying ourselves to alignment with the EU because it means not being able to adopt all the rules that they want or abolish the rules that they want abolished. The same con which could work on the DUP might work on them as well. I mean, the dim ones, but that's most of them. A magical emergency lever which stops any dynamic alignment with the EU when the government don't like the sound of it. It would allow Sunak to claim that he has the legislative tools to block any EU rules that he says are not in the UK's interest unilaterally, which means that in theory, there's no change to rules that we could not adopt, whether the EU like it or not, so full Brexit freedoms. But because he'll have promised the EU he will never actually use this lever, it would have no practical impact at all. An illusion, a con, legislation that isn't actually going to result in anything changing. So who are the government conning? Can only be the Brexiteers, realistically. He can't con the EU, but the EU are pragmatic. They won't care about legislation that gives the illusion of a unilateral lever as long as they are satisfied that it will never be touched without their approval. In reality, he can't really con the DUP on a fundamental level either, because they will also have access to expert analysis. But I suspect they just wanted a face-saving way out of this now. And they will go along with it, recognising that they've basically lost. But that's how I read the situation. More may become clear tomorrow, and if anything is fundamentally different, presumably I'll be discussing that on Thursday. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.